Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Westworld is the HBO show about a theme park full of robots that get sentient, decide to rebel against the humans that made them, the ones who treat them like NPCs in a computer game. And now it's starting on its third season, where a handful of those robots, or hosts as they're known, have finally broken free of the theme park and gotten out into the real world in the future. Episode 1, Parce, Domine, starts out with Hollywood go-to German villain actor Thomas Kretschmann, and he's like an angry super rich elite guy, and he's living in China in his crazy penthouse complex, and he's being kinda dismissive to his clearly long-suffering wife and shouting about how his share price has been falling since the Westworld park disaster. I mean, to find out about that, check out the video summaries on seasons 1 and 2 of Westworld, which I just might make, seeing as I've got kind of a lot of free time at the moment like everybody else. Anyway, he goes to bed and gets woken up, and it's like he's in midsummer or something. He's got a gas mask on, and everybody else in the house is knocked out or possibly dead. And not only that, but his house computer won't respond to him. And wouldn't you know, it's Delores. And she like cable ties his specs to his face, and they must be Google Glass because he sees like visions of like his dead, presumably murdered by him wife. And she makes him like transfer some super secret files and cash to her, or like she'll blackmail him. But then like says that it's fine and he can live, but nowadays she only hurts people who try to hurt her. So of course he tries to hurt her, and oops, it was a trap, and he bangs his head and drowns. And his wife wakes up and literally does nothing to help him. Okay. But old Delores is in for the long haul, and she's been putting the moves on like this weedy dweeby guy, and he's like the son of a different rich, super elite kind of guy, but he turns out as it's only a figurehead in his dad's creation, which is like a supercomputer that's semi-controlled by some really shady types who are all secret and stuff. And they don't take any shit from him or his bodyguard, who's Chibs from Sons of Anarchy. Now Delores tries to coax like who the shady guy behind everything is, but her cover ends up getting blown and like Chibs zaps her, and then he flies her out to the boondocks to dispose of her quietly, but of course she's a robot, so pumping her full of poison does pretty much nothing at all. And then when an empty like robot taxi arrives, it's enough of a distraction for her to go like full crazy robot rampage on them all, and then she escapes and she chases down Chibs, who was the only survivor, and she hunts him down and replaces him with like a host copy, who after killing him legs it, and then Delores like fends off some nearby cops or guards or something, and anyway she deads them all, but then she ends up getting shot in the process, and it's not looking too great for her. Meanwhile, Valkyrie from Thor, who's actually a host copy of the real person because she got dead in season 2, although we're not entirely sure which one of the hosts is actually on the inside. But whoever it is somebody that's working for Delores' team and doing all kinds of weird business decisions at Delos, usurping the place from the inside out. And then there's Bernard, and he's the host who's sort of on nobody's team, and he's hiding out in the middle of nowhere working in like a meat factory somewhere far away from the cities under a fake name. And he's hiding out there because he apparently got the blame for a lot of the deaths at the park, because they never actually worked out that he was a host. And when he's not working, he's like checking his computer code to see if he's being hacked at all by activating some sort of Super Bernard personality thing with a little clicker. And it comes in kind of handy when he gets blackmailed by a couple of workers who figured out who he is. So he just turns himself off and lets Super Bernard beat them up before skedaddling off to hire like a slow boat back to the Westworld park. But the big new character this season is Jesse from Breaking Bad, and he's playing a guy called Caleb. He's like some kind of ex-military dude with a lot of PTSD, and he can't quite function in this world again, since like his skill set doesn't really match up with the future's needs. So instead he does construction work during the day and looks after his mum, who's clearly like doesn't remember him because she's got problems in her brain. And then at night he uses a kind of phone quest game thing to pick up illegal dark web jobs, like they could be robbing an ATM and stuff. But as chance would have it, his last job one night is to deliver a car to some shady corporate types, and they're up to something dodgy down at the boondocks. But anyway, he does his bit and then he just walks away. Only later on he happens down an alleyway and he hears someone in trouble, and look, it's Delores, and she's in a bad way. And just when you think it's all over and the credits are rolling, it suddenly cuts back to Maeve, and she wakes up in like period garb with a German dude tied up in a chair, and a whole army of like proper Nazis outside, and they're apparently in Nazi Germany. I mean, that's a new one. So what did I think? Well, I think something that was playing when they started advertising this third season of Westworld was that the makers knew that they'd kind of gone off the rails a wee bit in season 2. And clearly the best way to fix it, this show, which was being touted as like the next Game of Thrones, that was back when Game of Thrones wasn't a complete pile of shit, but it was basically that you were going to do a complete soft reboot of the show. Take the characters that are left over and send them out into the real world and basically start a completely different narrative at that point, which is kind of not a million miles away from what they're trying to do with the Star Trek Discovery's third season. But it turns out this season isn't quite such a total sea change. So it's clearly like it relies on you knowing who the characters were from the previous show, and then by the looks of things, they're also returning back to the park again later on. And it's clear that one of the aspects of the show they continue to delve into is sort of the video gaming aspect of it, especially the video gaming aspect of the Delos parks. Because I mean, of course, like the obvious comparison here is that Westworld is a bit like the computer game Red Dead Redemption. You know, it allows you to go in and live out a cowboy fantasy. And obviously, there's other parks as well included in the Delos facility that you see. There's like Japanese World and Raja World and stuff. And that makes sense because that was kind of the same in the original Westworld film. You know, they had like Cowboy World, they also had Medieval World. And I think in Future World, they also had Japanese World and Space World and stuff. So yeah, so the idea is it was a bit like a live action computer game that you could play. But the show really takes models and things and ideas from computer games. I mean, there's stuff about branching conversations and character models getting reused as different people and stuff in different roles. And it really took an awful lot of idea from different games. But this season, it's less like a sort of a cowboy thing, and it feels more of something like a future cyberpunk world, maybe something like the Deus Ex series or Syndicate, or maybe like a futuristic version of Watch Dogs, which was already a wee bit futuristic, but this is even more so. I mean, especially the way that like Caleb uses his phone to get illegal jobs, which is also something that feels straight out of like Grand Theft Auto. I mean, there's a really GTA feel to that kind of side of things. And in fact, it's interesting that straight off the bat at the beginning, the guy from Catch 22 turns up and saying that, you know, he believes the whole world is some kind of simulation. Well, okay, Descartes, you know, but frankly, it wouldn't surprise me if the show actually led down that path. I mean, suggesting that there really maybe there is some more elaborate thing to this universe than just the park, and that maybe actually the whole thing is a simulation. I mean, I can see the show doing that, and frankly, that might actually be their big ended plan of the show. Dropping it here might just be a bit of a laugh, or maybe it's just a red herring. I mean, it's hard to say because even with season two, no matter how well you actually managed to think out what was going on, they apparently rewrote half of it halfway through the season because fans had already guessed what they were going to do on Reddit. But yeah. Anyway, getting back to Caleb and his place in the world. I mean, it's an interesting future vision, you know. It's kind of a far cry from the grim Blade Runner-y stuff of shows like Altered Carbon or well, stuff like Blade Runner. I mean, this is more glitz and suits. It reminds me a little bit of the design of In Time, like that film with Justin Timberlake. And even, you know, poor people like Caleb look pretty healthy and kind of well dressed. I mean, you know, they've all got the motorized cars and things, and everything's DNA coded, and everyone has like a mobile earphone thing to go along with their phone, and that can be scrambled by criminals, like flooding it with noise. And another aspect I liked about it was this idea that the world's run on algorithms and stuff, so that it's a meritocracy, as Caleb says, meaning that people get given a job if they met all the criteria. And then even like the phone calls come from robots, and Caleb's kind of messed up with his PTSD. I mean, he's getting calls from like computerized versions of his dead soldier buddy who died in the mission with him, and I suspect we're going to get more about that in the future. You know, it needs to do that to keep up with his benefits or something. I mean, so I totally get what this is kind of like alluding to, like, you know, ex-war veterans coming back and not getting the help they need. And I imagine that's going to be part of what the story's building on. And I think some of this is actually really good world building in story terms. You know, it's done with like kind of a casual effort, and that's something the show has always excelled at. You know, the writing in the show has usually been pretty solid. But it's also really good to see what the characters are doing. I mean, season two ended in kind of a weird no man's land with huge amounts of the characters dead and a whole bunch of the other hosts either getting killed or like getting lost into the computer construct other world thing that they'd found, or literally the thing was what they kept referring to it as.
I'm already in the thing, aren't I?
And it was good to see that Maeve's still around, you know, that little bit post-credit scene where you see that she's still stuck in the park and she's apparently in some kind of World War II world. And that's about the most common thing I can think of from just about any computer game as a setting. So I expect they're going to absolutely milk that to death, like, especially killing millions of Nazis, because that's kind of de rigueur. But yeah, I mean, it's early days for the show, and the story hasn't really gotten underway, and I'm kind of generally enjoying the acting. I mean, there was nothing really bad about it. And there's definitely a few new familiar faces amongst the cast, people like Tommy Flanagan and Rafi Gabron, and presume there's going to be a lot more coming in the future episodes. But the thing is, this show still has some issues. I'm seeing some issues popping up from back in the previous seasons, and actually some new ones as well. Now, it's important to mention that overall, I actually like this episode of Westworld quite a lot. In fact, I'm quite glad that this video took me a wee bit of time to put together because I just watched the latest episode of Picard, which absolutely got me thinking that they'd really ripped off an awful lot of the concepts from Westworld.
Their purpose is to seek out advanced synthetic life and excise it from the oppression by organics.
So I'm going to preface this by saying that, as opposed to that episode of Picard and most of the rest of them, this is not unwatchably bad. not by any stretch. Although I am seeing a little warning signs, as I said, that make me concerned not only about the direction the show's taken, but how stylistically they're doing it in a way that follows like the second season rather than the really clever first season. And it's going down a very sort of right here, right now, 2019 sort of narrative. And obviously, I know it's 2020 now, but this was all shot in 2019. And 2020 is kind of doing its own crazy sideways sort of thing in Bizarro World. But yeah, let's kick this off with like a few of the weird stylistic choices. I mean, straight off, total wee nitpick, but like the rear camera in the car, that shows him driving way faster than actually the one outside the front window. That's totally distracting, so why do that? Why even bother having it? Or like how at the end of the episode, Delores manages to drive off after this guy, even though he's got a head start and she takes it off in a different direction at an angle. She somehow manages to like stop before he's actually decided to stop wherever it is he's going. I mean, did she know where he was actually heading? It seems a bit strange. I mean, sure, she can track his car, but it looked like he stopped because he was feeling bad and wanted to get out of the car. But instead, it seems like she somehow anticipated exactly where he was going. Anyway, it makes her just a little bit overpowered if she can like think of anything people are going to do and predict it, and she can do absolutely anything with the technology and the computers. And she seems a little bit overpowered, especially for like right off the gate in the first episode this season. And then she has the shootout with these bunch of guys who I presume are supposed to be security guards or some kind of other trained individuals or cops or something. And yet somehow these guys can't actually manage to hit a woman standing clearly in the open firing a gun, even though they've got like basically a triangulation of fire around it. I mean, this really annoyed me. That should be a total turkey shoot. That's really bad blocking, really bad sort of like direction. I mean, that shouldn't happen. It's so obvious. I kept thinking, why haven't they shot her like 6 times and they only ended up getting her once? And also, why did the German bad guy not try to take the glasses off? I mean, I presume it might hurt a bit, but most modern like cable ties actually have a quick release notch in them. You know, they've got that little tab that you press that lets you take them back off. And like maybe these future ones don't do that, or maybe the cheap and nasty ones that don't have that. But even then, if it was that tight, he'd probably like fallen unconscious because it would be cutting the blood off to his brain. And also, when he dies, I mean, he's not like coming forward with nearly enough speed and force for him to be flung quite so far into the pool and smacking his head on the opposite side. I mean, also more of that's his house, it's his pool. I mean, surely he knows like the pool is right there. And I don't know about you, but I mean, even in moments of panic, like I know where the doors and walls of my house are, so I wouldn't be screaming forward, going, swinging something that was going to fling me like 8 feet forward, like straight over a pool and bang my head. I mean, I presume maybe he was in a bit of panic, and that if he hadn't done that, she'd have just shot him in the back of the head or something from the other side of the room. But yeah, that whole scene was kind of naff. I mean, also, like, it's in China, so why is he, like, a white German businessman? In fact, why are all the bad guys in this white guys? I mean, that's the whole thing. Like, every bad guy in the show invariably seems to turn out to be a white businessman. I mean, sure, we had Tessa Thompson in season 1, like as this snarky businesswoman, and she got even more evil in season 2, which, like, kind of a bit psycho, and that was a bit cliched and strange. I'm totally okay with shows having white villains, whatever. I mean, I grew up in the UK watching films in the 80s and 90s where literally every movie bad guy was some kind of either classic British actor or playing a British person, or sometimes playing an American or playing a European person. But yeah, so I'm used to like white British guys being the bad guy. But it feels like in like nowadays, 2020, 2019, that it's just the done thing that if you make a bad guy character a white straight guy, then it's totally okay for them to die and for them just to be evil without any other character development. And it's getting really lazy. And like I overlook this kind of stuff an awful lot, and it's getting harder and harder to put it aside, particularly when like this is an episode where Dolores kills 2 guys. And it turns out both of them not only are like angry, nasty white guys, but they both ended up doing the nasty tour when they were in the park on holiday. I mean, fair enough, she wants to kill them in that case, but now she's cozying up to like some snarky, petty rich kid guy who, is totes okay with his girlfriend being disappeared by his henchmen. I mean, it's a fair guess that he's going to get dead in an episode or 2 because it turns out that he probably did something as well, or if not, then he probably did it to someone else, or would have been nasty if he had been in the park. And it's just lazy bad guy writing. You've seen this in films and TV shows before, and it's what I always used to think of as the acceptably nasty victim trope. I mean, it probably has a better name, but anyway, it was a classic in shows like Buffy and stuff like that, where you would see some person get dead, and usually in like the cold open, like from whatever the monster of the week was. But just so you don't feel too bad, they'd do a stereotypical like kick on a dog. They'd be like nasty or sexist or racist, or they'd work on Wall Street or something like that. But Westworld's go-to acceptable nasty is that everybody went to the park and assaulted Delores in the hay barn, which is kind of a bit grim. But again, it's also kind of really lazy. And in the case of like Thomas Kretschmann, he's also mean to his wife. He acts like a total asshole. He shouts at like his subordinates. I mean, that's literally like an orgy of evidence for him being bad straight off the bat. And all in the name of just making our robot freedom fighter Delores, who's also our protagonist, not seem like a bad person. I mean, compare this with the similar cold opening scene from the show Black Sails, Season 3, where I won't get into the exact shades of why or spoil anything, but our formerly anti-hero but not terrible person, Captain Flint, breaks into the local governor's house and ends up like killing everybody because the events of Season 2 have finally led him to pretty much a breaking point. Now, he's kind of a man with a vendetta, but Dolores is more or less the same. I mean, hell, in a lot of ways she's worse. Like, but she did terrible things in Season 2, just shooting random people, and then that's kind of worse in a lot of ways than something like, Flint's Vendetta, or like the kind of ambivalence you saw in like the Robot Lassie from Ex Machina, which is also worth comparing, but I'll wait until there might be something a bit more valid of comparison in that and not spoil it until then. But it's also ascribing acceptable murder to people who did the equivalent of basically shooting like a non-player character in a computer game, which is more or less the first thing anybody ever does when they're playing a computer game and they're bored and they've saved their game. I mean, honestly, it's true. Like you speak to anybody who's played a game like that, the first thing they do after they find the first save point is, can I shoot everybody in the room? What effect will that have? Will it change the outcome of the game? Because none of it's real. None of these people are real. And that's the whole point. And, it's how far do we take that thing? But now the show's morality seems to be, well, if you ever did that, then frankly, you ought to die, which is kind of a bit crazy. And, it's fine. We're supposed to feel like Delores is the bad guy, maybe. I mean, she basically was in Season 2, or we're supposed to be conflicted about it. Only the show doesn't want her to be the bad guy, because it makes everybody she's fighting against really, really horrible people. So we don't really like her, or at least I don't really like her anymore. And it's sad, because I really root for her in Season 1. But by the end of Season 2, I kind of wanted, like, the Man in Black or Teddy or someone to just shoot her. And like the show's kind of doubling down on other unlikable characters. I mean, take the scene with Tessa Thompson, who I find to be pretty much unwatchable in just about everything that isn't Creed, because basically she plays exactly the same role in every single film. She's basically the same snarky bitch in every single thing, other than the Creed, where she was actually an interesting character. Or maybe Annihilation, where she was just a bit weird, but she was rubbish in that as well. And it's just her walking in and, being snooty and then telling off a room full of angry mans, and one very notably not an angry white man. I mean, I don't really think that the room's gender and ethnic makeup casting choices were an accident, but anyway, enough about that. I don't want to get into that kind of thing. I don't want to rant. I mean, there's a reason I'm bringing this up, and it'll make sense by the end. But also, there's also the fact that Maeve isn't totally dead, and the fact that Bernard's heading back to the park suggests that he's going to go and get her and possibly some other people and bring them back from the park. Even though how he knows that he should do that, I'm not entirely sure. But they appear to be going down this kind of Magneto Xavier route from X-Men with them, which itself was kind of based on the idea of like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and how they had different views on how they should get rights for African Americans in the 20th century. So, like, sure, I mean, we've seen this kind of thing before, and we're likely going to see this as turning into a big thing between Maeve and Dolores, that being their big conflict to the show. But the trouble was Maeve wasn't exactly the most likable person either. I mean, she was a lot nicer, but she was also kind of a pain in the arse, and she was all just obsessed about her daughter, and she also was just like killing people left, right, and centre. And of course, yes, these people have been through hell, so that's fine, but they're also not people, they're robots. And here we are at this point, and we're into a new season, and about the only likable character is Caleb, the new guy. And I feel like I can already see his arc panning out in a really cliched fashion as well. I mean, he's clearly a broken but good-natured guy down on his luck, and he meets a charismatic leader with a cause, and I'm guessing that he's going to start seeing cracks in the way they operate and ends up turning again. Oh wait, no, that was basically Teddy's arc from season 2, and that ended really badly for him. So I mean, hopefully they'll go a different route. But considering the show is centered around Delores, I can't see some new character coming in and then killing her off anytime soon. I mean, I could be wrong, I could be totally backwards, and it'll turn out that he will kill her, and then he'll end up being or somebody else will, and he'll end up being like the human leader of an anti-human resistance, which seems like a completely stupid idea and would be totally insane if that hadn't literally happened on Star Trek Picard this very week. Now, what worries me about Westworld is that this first episode's diving straight into all these cliches and tropes right from the beginning. And considering season 2 tied itself in knots, trying to be really convoluted and clever and doing all kind of mystery box stuff when it really wasn't needed, they also leaned hard into anybody who visits the park as a bad person, especially if they're a man, because they didn't really focus on what any of the female guests did. In fact, the only woman we ever see taking advantage of or being bad to a female host in the show that I can remember was that time that you found the guy off 300 tied up on like Tessa Thompson's bed at one point, because she's a head of the board or big person in the company, and she's just making use of the assets while she's there, and because she is basically horrible, and she got her just desserts by getting shot in the face. Now, That's kind of the thing, and it's one of these issues that I'm having problems with, in that this is a very 2019 show. And it's filled itself with like female protagonists who mostly are the only survivors of the last season. And the trouble with that is it means that the only characters we know going forward who are actually male are Bernard, and he's semi-insane and can basically be taken over and reprogrammed by either one of the female leads. And there's a man in black who hasn't shown up yet, but he got his ass kicked by all of them last season, and then was spent half the time being lectured by his daughter. And now at the end of it, he was left being lectured by his daughter, who was possibly a robot from the future, which wasn't, that whole bit didn't really make much sense. But who else does that leave? I mean, they could maybe bring back Teddy and people like that, but then other than that, what, there's the scientist guys? I mean, they were nobodies. Nobody really cared about them or what they did and said. They were kind of comic relief characters. And the reason I bring up all of this is because I'm all for equality in writing and in shows, but the watchword of the last few years of a lot of genre TV and film is strong female characters above all. Never let them seem weak, never let them seem to be beaten by a guy at any situation because nobody likes it. And the problem with that is that's fine if you're a good writer and you do it in an interesting way. But the way not to do it and to lose your mixed gender audience is to just make all of the male characters crap, weak, stupid, or inept. And this show's really been spiraling down that rabbit hole ever since like the end of season 1. And then season 3 is like doubling down on it even more. So overall, I mean, I'm really interested to see where this goes, and I honestly hope that I've just got the wrong end of the stick with this episode, but it's really hard not to feel this way. And what I loved about season 1 of Westworld is it kept me guessing, and all the characters were interesting, and I was kind of rooting for people, but I wasn't exactly sure what was going and who was doing what, and that was why it was fascinating. And I really hope this season manages to manage that, and that would be great. But let's see where it goes, and I hope it's not just a whole bunch of rah-rah yay cliches. So till next time, I've been Ian. And these definitely have been some grumpy opinions.